Hello everyone and welcome to episode 9 of The Journeymen, a podcast dedicated to the work of overlooked and underrated filmmakers. On each episode we pick a director who we feel more or less fits that description and work our way chronologically through their entire filmography. My name's Michael Pattison, I'm here with my co-host
Bobby Lowe.
Follow us on Twitter at _Journeymen and subscribe to us through SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes or YouTube. This episode is the second of 3 dedicated to Tony Scott and will cover The Last Boy Scout from 1991, True Romance 1993, Crimson Tide 1995, The Fan 1996 and Enemy of the State 1998. Let's go straight into The Last Boy Scout.
Jesus, free agents. Gimme, 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 gimme. Now you got guys on PCP wigging out and shooting themselves on the field. The American public is piss pot tired of it, and they're changing the channel.
Ratings are down. So you're gonna bribe some senators to legalize gambling?
Legalize sports gambling. You see, with all the heroes gone, legalized gambling is about the only thing that'll save the beast. You follow me, Joe? We're talking about some big bucks here. We're talking about billions. That's 9 zeros, son.
I'm not your fucking son.
Well, Joe, have you ever heard of the Senate's commission to investigate gambling in professional sports?
Is that who you're paying off?
The commission's gonna vote next March. I got every one of them in my hip pocket except Senator Calvin Boehnert. I tried to bribe that son of a bitch, Joe, and he gave it back because it wasn't enough.
What's he want?
$6 million, or he'll go straight to the police. You know, I think it's just going to be cheaper to kill that son of a bitch.
Taking off a U.S. senator is pretty ballsy even for an asshole like you.
You said it, Joe boy. That's why we're going to frame you for the senator's murder.
Okay, so The Last Boy Scout, written by Shane Black from a story by Shane Black and Greg Hicks, produced by Joel Silver and Michael Levy for Geffen Pictures and Silver Pictures, distributed by Warner Brothers, released in the US in December of 1991, in the UK in February of 92, and in Ireland in March of 92. The film was not a commercial success. It had an estimated budget of $75 million and only grossed $59.5 domestically. This despite Shane Black having set the record for the highest fee, or highest price ever paid for a spec script. He was paid $1.75 million after a bidding war. Okay, so the plot of this one. Once a first-rate Secret Service agent, Joe Hallenbeck, played by Bruce Willis, is now a gruff private investigator whose latest gig is protecting an exotic dancer, played by Halle Berry. When she's murdered, he grudgingly teams up with her boyfriend, Jimmy Dix, played by Damon Wayans, an ex-quarterback with a gambling problem, and the two go after her killers. Before long, they stumble onto a plot by a well-known football magnate, played by Noble Willingham, to bribe federal legislators into legalizing sports gambling. Had you seen this one before?
I hadn't. I think I'd seen Late on Christmas Day once on the television. I think I saw from the scene with the gun inside the teddy bear, or the whatever it is, onwards, but I can't remember anything other than that scene. And you?
Right. Yeah, I had seen it several times. I saw it when I was, 12, maybe, something like that, kind of around that age. And I remember my brother and I thinking so we are introduced to Joe, Bruce Willis, when he has woken up, or sorry, he's asleep in his car the morning after, an epic bender, and 3 kids come by and the window's open and they decide to play a prank on him and they throw a dead squirrel in on top of him. And then his friend asks him how he is and he says something about, I think I've fucked a squirrel to death. We thought that was the funniest joke.
Really?
Yeah. When we were 12. This is the first of 2 films back to back for Tony Scott that are marked by a very, very distinct writer's voice.
Sure.
In this case, Shane Black, and then we're going to talk about True Romance and Quentin Tarantino. I think in terms of Scott and his writer kind of working in sync and sort of feeling like they gel into a single kind of sensibility. I think this is the more successful of the two. I think Shane Black's. I think the whole kind of like like LA noir kind of. It's hard to talk about it without preemptively talking about True Romance, so I won't do that. But I'll come back to this. I'll circle back around to this point when we talk about True Romance because it's kind of more pertinent to that film. But yeah, I mean it's a post Die Hard role for Bruce Willis. He's kind of playing. He's not playing John McClane, but if John McClane kind of went in a similar direction with Die Hard with a Vengeance, like burned out and kind of like high functioning alcoholic and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like stylistically, this is of a piece, which is to Scott's credit. I don't know. I completely agree that Black has a distinctive. Well, I mean, there's nothing to agree or disagree with. He is a distinctive scriptwriter with a certain voice, if you like. But for me, the script bound tonality of this is quite uneven. Like I think in simple terms, I think it's that some of the one-liners work and some of them don't. Or that sometimes even
definitely
Willis and Wayne's can pull them off, and sometimes they can't. Or maybe it's just like a vague feeling I get that some of the dialogue's a little bit too knowing rather than like dramatically plausible. And like the realism and that knowingness sort of brush up against each other, sometimes to a productive degree, sometimes not. Like, so this is, and I'll come back to the Willis post Die Hard thing. But this is for me one of those like violent action comedies that doesn't really dwell on anything like morally or emotionally speaking. Like we get a shot of Jimmy Dix crying in Corey, his dead girlfriend's apartment. But for the most part, it juggernauts its way along, like because it prioritizes like plot and the action pertaining to it. I mean, there's like 2 or 3 unexpected but very spectacular deaths before we even figure out what the plot or the stakes even are here. Like, which seem designed to sort of simultaneously draw us in, but also wrong foot us. Like, the guy who is having an affair with Joe's wife, who also hires him to investigate this thing with Corey.
Yeah, in the hopes that he'll be killed.
In the hopes that he'll be killed, as it turns out, although we're not aware of that at that point, is like fucking blowing up in his car when he puts the key in the ignition. And it's like, it announces this film as something that is ultimately quite daft, even though it's got that central protagonist who's like this washed up guy who's a bit down on his luck through his own doing or otherwise. So on one level, it's got that sort of noirish private eye sheen to it. On the other, it's a fucking film in which villains get blown up.
Yeah, I mean, you described it as an action comedy. I wouldn't consider it a comedy at all. I mean,
okay, so
like
that was going to be my question.
Like, it's not. It's like Beverly Hills Cop 2 is a comedy. Like this is an action thriller. It has snappy dialogue. Like I wouldn't consider.
Well, I was going to ask, like, do you think it's funny? Like I get that it's like sort of, this is how I interpret it anyway. I get it that it's trying to be funny, but I much prefer chemistry based and or character based comedy. And to be honest, I think this film runs a little thin on that. Like there's one visual gag, if you can call it a gag, which is when Joe tells Milo, like the chief sort of henchman, just before the clip that we've just heard, that if he touches him again, he'll kill him. And Milo does. And then Willis like immediately takes a drag of a cigarette in close up. Like that's funny to me because it sets up and anticipates that kind of predictably satisfying action film catharsis of him finally getting revenge on that moment. And I suppose that showdown in the forest when he holds the teddy bear that I just alluded to with the gun inside it is also a kind of gag based action. But I didn't find it funny. Like, so if I may continue in this vein, to come back to the post Die Hard Willis thing. For me, he's maybe too cool to be funny. Like in Die Hard, he has this vulnerability to contrast against his resilience or durability and creativity as a cop against the odds. And for the most part in that film, he's having to communicate with like enemies and like acquaintances over like a walkie-talkie. So this is, in contrast to that, less charming, dry run for Die Hard with a Vengeance, like trying Willis out against a partner, but with the racialized tension curiously like dimmed down between them. So in that respect, I thought of this more in relation to like a film like Lethal Weapon than I did Die Hard. But as I say, but with the racialized tension sort of dimmed down. But so all of which is to say, if that is to be taken as a criticism of the film, it's predicated on my idea that it's intended to be a comedy.
I definitely don't approach it as a comedy.
Right.
You know, like some of the dialogue is supposed to be kind of, some of the dialogue is like for example, there are two scenes in the film where he, you know, kind of does like impromptu stand up to distract somebody who's about to kill him. And, like one of them is like he tells mother jokes, and like the jokes are funny, right? I feel like whenever we discuss anything with any comic element to it at all, it's just like it's just me saying that was funny, and you go nah.
Nah, mate, I'm not having it. And yet we do make each other laugh, so we do have shared affinities with regard to what is comical or laughter inducing.
Sure.
But yeah, no, it's very difficult to sort of mount defenses of comedy and also to mount critiques against it. In a way that goes beyond just like personal preference.
But I wouldn't say that. Yeah, sorry, I wouldn't say that that I'm coming to this like when we talked about Beverly Hills Cop 2 on the last episode. I said that I was kind of waiting for the next comic set piece where Eddie Murphy would, you know, interact with some new bit character.
Sure.
And like, you know, kind of bounce off them. That's not the case here. I'm not waiting for the next one-liner. You know, like I'm invested in this as a kind of an exercise in style. You know, as kind of postmodern noir. I like Bruce Willis's kind of almost like nihilistic. It's kind of like nihilistic cool.
Yeah.
I think his rapport with Wayans is solid. You know, there's a scene where there's a car chase where Damon Wayans shouts, if you go any faster, we'll go back in time.
Right.
That line was used in the Die Hard trilogy video game for the PlayStation. They had Samuel L. Jackson saying that if you're driving through too fast or whatever, he's slow down and we'll go back in time. Obviously they're both. Wait, this is not a 20th Century Fox film though. That's weird. Because when I heard it in this film, I thought, oh yeah, that's because they're both Fox movies, but it's not Fox. It was distributed by Warner Brothers. It's interesting.
Yeah, curious.
And I disagree that there's no emotional content to this movie either. What do you make of the father-daughter relationship?
Did I say that was emotional content?
Yeah, you said it didn't. It kind of just powers along without any, without settling on any kind of emotional. I can't remember your exact words, but the only exception you gave was Damon Wayans crying in Corey's apartment. But what about the father? What about the father? Because we have his daughter here is played by a 13-year-old Danielle Harris.
So that's an increasing point of significance in the film. This relationship. It's this like tonally uneven, like simultaneously, like there's something flippantly unpleasant but enjoyably daft about the film in general, I think, but like it's sleazily like sour like banal veneer. So like you've got adultery, parental neglect, emotional abuse, even like the political corruption that's alluded to is so banal that it's never made clear which party Baynard, who I think is the mayor.
He's a senator, I think.
He's a senator. Sorry, it's not clear which party he's like running for. Like
No, they say. I'm pretty sure they say he's a Republican.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I retract that in that case. And so yeah, and another part of that is the extended dialogue scene between Joe and Darian, his daughter, with Jimmy present.
Yeah.
Like it's proper horrible to watch. I think that scene, like
really,
effectively
I think it's really funny.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
I see. And well, maybe there's a.
No, sorry. Really funny is not quite right. I think it's effective at what it's trying to do. I think it's like darkly comic and also disturbing, and because he's emotionally abusing his daughter.
Yeah.
But it's I think that scene has layers.
And she's precocious beyond her years, and in this film story, that scene's very effective in establishing her as such because she employs her ingenuity later on, and she figures in the teddy bear scene that I keep alluding to.
Yeah.
I'm always a little bit just annoyed though by kids who don't do as they're told. Not in the sense of that scene in particular, because you're right, he is emotionally abusing her. But like when Jimmy says, "Just fucking stay in the car," right? When he's gonna save, when he's gonna try and save Joe, and she shows up anyway, and you just know it's gonna come. But so, right, I feel like I'm coming across here as somebody who didn't like this film at all. Having said all of this, I do enjoy it. I think probably with the exception of The Hunger, which we covered on the first part, on the last episode, sorry, this is Tony Scott's most visually sophisticated film that we've covered so far.
Okay.
Like, just some of the, like, lighting structures that he saturates a scene with and the contrasts are absolutely amazing. Did you notice, by the way, the use of pigeons, which seems to be made a thing of, especially early on, like arbitrarily, like you'll just have like a fucking flock of pigeons, if that's the correct term, just like in the foreground of frame. And I felt like, is this like a demeaning like response to John Woo and his use of doves?
Yeah, no, it's like, I mean, it's redundant at this point to say that the film looks great. We've said that for every Tony Scott film so far. But I like these, like, you know, like you called it sleazy. I like these films like this film wasn't particularly well received either. But you know, films like this or a film like Die Hard 2, where it's like really bloody and really violent and really like, you know, like quote unquote gratuitous. I miss those films because they don't really make them anymore on this scale, you know. Like you don't really get A-list actors starring in these kinds of things that are just kind of gleefully nihilistic and gruesome. I mean, like
unless they're superhero films.
Like what?
Like, you know, your favorite Batman versus Superman. Like that. What my point is that those kinds of films have replaced in the market this kind of film.
Oh, sure, yeah, but like Batman vs Superman, for all its darkness, is still PG-13. It's like, you know, so it's not, it doesn't have like, you know, excessive like exploding squibs and like the villain at the end falls into the blades of a helicopter and just like explodes in this like cloud of blood. That kind of, I miss that kind of stuff. I like these early 90s. In fact, the only exception would be kind of like Stallone's Rambo 4. You know, that takes it to like another level. So, yeah.
Yeah. What would you give it out of 10?
Oh, 8.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
6.
6, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
There's just maybe too many chunks of its running time. Like, so after Corey's been killed and they're sort of regrouping at Corey's apartment and then at Joe's, like nothing really seems to happen. Like it doesn't really advance their chemistry. It doesn't really advance the plot. Like the story only starts to advance again when the bad guys come to off them. And it's just, yeah, just there's I feel like there's a sharper film that could have been made instead of this.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next one and see if you continue to speak ill of the dead. 1993's True Romance.
Well, they found nothing. In fact, they think it's drug-related.
Drug-related? Why drug-related?
Well, apparently Drexel had his big toe stuck in that shit.
Really?
Drexel had an association with a fellow named Blue Lou Boyle. Name mean anything to you?
No.
Well, if you don't hang around his circle, no reason it should.
Why, who is he?
Gangster, drug dealer, somebody that you don't want on your ass. Now look, Clarence, the more I hear about this Drexel fucker, the more I think he did the right thing. This guy wasn't just some wild flake.
No, man, that's what I was trying to tell you before. The guy was like a mad dog. So the cops, they don't think they're not after us then?
Nah, till they hear something better, they'll just assume Drexel had a falling out with Blue Lou. And once you leave town, I wouldn't even worry about it.
Thanks a lot, Daddy. You really came through for me.
I got some money I can give you.
No, keep it.
Well now, son, I want you to know that I hope everything works out with you and Alabama. I like her. And I think you make a real cute couple.
So True Romance was written by, as we know, Quentin Tarantino, produced by Gary Barber, Samuel Hadida, James G. Robinson, and Bill Unger for Morgan Creek Pictures, Davis Films, and A Band Apart, distributed by Warner Brothers and released in the US in September 1993, in the UK a month later, and in Ireland a month after that. Made $12.3 million only from a $12.5 million budget. Wasn't a success at all at the box office. And the script entails, as per Google, comic book nerd and Elvis fanatic Clarence, played by Christian Slater, and a prostitute named Alabama, played by Patricia Arquette, fall in love. Clarence breaks the news to her pimp and ends up killing him. Grabbing a suitcase of cocaine on his way out, thinking it is Alabama's clothing, the two hit the road for California, hoping to sell the cocaine, but the mob is soon after them. We'd both seen this before. Me, actually, only once, years ago, when I guess I was first discovering who Quentin Tarantino was. So watched it in that context, never in the context of it being a Tony Scott film, although I've since come to, know it as such. I liked it a lot. I couldn't remember much of it, but on this time round, I think it's an extremely solid film, and I'm eager to know now what you meant on the last segment when you were referring to sort of Shane Black's sentiments as a writer and sensibilities as a writer, sort of being more in train with Tony Scott's vision as a director than Tarantino and Tony Scott's here.
Well, I had seen it before several times, and I also associated it primarily with Quentin Tarantino, as I did Killing Zoe, which was Roger Avary's directorial debut.
Sure.
Which I think when I first saw that, I thought that it was directed by Tarantino. I think it just said from producer Quentin Tarantino on the video box.
Yeah.
And I've always liked True Romance, but I've never really strongly connected with it. And the way a lot of people, like, it's one of their favorite films of all time, and some people hold it above all of Tarantino's own films. So when I revisited it this time, I was eager to see if this would be the time when it would finally win me over wholesale. And I liked it less this time than I ever have before.
Really?
Yeah. What I meant on the previous segment when I compared Scott with Black to Scott with Tarantino, okay, so I think we kind of have to talk about the origin of the movie a little bit, because this was originally a 70-page script by Roger Avary, who gave it to Tarantino to rewrite. I might be getting some of these details wrong, but Tarantino ended up writing what I believe was a 500-page screenplay called The Open Road, and that screenplay was then split in half and turned into both True Romance and Natural Born Killers, as well as providing some of the material for Pulp Fiction. So, like in Pulp Fiction, the scene where the bullets miraculously miss Jules, that was originally Drexel. And the scene where the gun accidentally goes off in the car and shoots Marvin in the face, that was also originally Drexel. I'm not sure, he was either holding the gun or driving. So that was the Open Road was kind of like raw material that was farmed for various projects that were actually made. So there's an element of with those early Tarantino films, and I think you could say the same thing about like the later Tarantino films in their own respect. That, in fact, doesn't Tarantino say that all his films are set in the same universe? Like literally, they're all set in the Tarantino verse or whatever, with the exception, I think, of Kill Bill. I think he says Kill Bill is like a movie in that universe, like it's a movie that Jules and Vincent would watch or something. So there's that kind of thing. So there's an element of kind of interchangeability, and like a lot of people have criticized Tarantino for basically all of his characters just having his voice. And I think that's kind of the problem, is that like when I said that Black has a particular voice, I didn't mean this in the same way as Tarantino. I mean that Black has a particular kind of like strong sensibility as a writer in the way that he approaches genre elements and like the way that he appropriates noir and things like that. Tarantino has like a literal voice that comes out of all of his characters' mouths.
I'm going to shut you down. I'm going to shut your butt down.
So I don't know. There's something about the way that Scott does, like it's a tone thing. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what the distinction is, but there just feels like a clash for me in True Romance between the script and the kind of straightforwardness or something of the tone and the way that Scott directs it. Which I think, you know, that infamous and controversial scene between Christopher Walken and Dennis Hopper in Dennis Hopper's caravan or camper van or whatever, his mobile home. That scene, like this time watching that, I was like, ooh, like there is something off about it. The way that it's played, there's something. It's like it's missing a layer of irony or a layer of what would you say, like theatricality or something. There's like an extra layer that is typically there in a Tarantino film that Scott doesn't put there. You know, the way that Tarantino's films all feel like these kind of like you take like Django Unchained or the Inglourious Bastards or whatever, and it's like all of these old movies just like filtered through his imagination, whereas whatever movies he's drawing from here feel like they stopped short of that, and Scott kind of approached it on different terms. Like, how do you, to just specifically address that scene, how do you feel about that scene?
It's weird.
Because it's played 100% for laughs. Like, let me put it this way. I think there are two scenes, you know the way Quentin Tarantino's history with the N-word?
Yes. There
are two scenes. There's that scene in True Romance, and there's his own scene in Pulp Fiction. Yeah. Like, without those two scenes, I don't think he'd have the reputation that he has. And I don't think there'd be the controversy around him. Since like, it's hardly the only white filmmaker to ever have put that word in characters' mouths in his films, you know, so. And,
okay, so it's very Tarantino in general, this film, and that scene in particular, like the crisp dialogue, even like character names are designed to be said with like a kind of phonetic sensuality, like Clarence, Alabama. It's, you know, they're designed for actors to deliver with a certain inflection and use of tongue, almost to a literally fetishistic degree, I think. And you might even argue, some might even have argued already, that, you know, his specific use and apparent fixation with, you know, the N-word is on a phonetic, sensual level, which isn't to justify or defend it in any way. What makes that scene between Walken and Hopper so great, I think, is the actual performances. Like, the moment when Hopper realizes he's not going to get... Hopper, for those who haven't seen it, although if you haven't, wake up, plays Christian Slater's dad. and it takes place just after the clip we've just heard, or very soon after. Hopper realizes he's not going to get out there alive, and his face sort of momentarily betrays this like internal alarm and resignation and acceptance of that under the very, very brave front. So he tries to, I don't think, joke his way out of it. I think he realizes that he's going to die, so he may as well offend this guy and upset him to the degree that he does. And Walken counteracts that superbly.
I think what he's doing is, I think he knows that if he offends him enough to the extent where Walken feels that he has to kill him, that will save him from being tortured, basically, to try to get information out of him, that they believe he knows.
Sure.
I think it's more of a, like, you're right, he realizes that he's not going to get out of it alive, and, he'd rather die right then.
Yeah. It's, I mean, like...
Not necessarily to save himself, but to save his son.
Sure. Yeah. And I think the acting and performances completely transcend the sort of rudimentary scenario that is established on the page. Like Walken, like, oh, this guy, it's like, and Hopper, and the moment that I've just referred to, that Hopper embodies, like, gives this a real heart, like an emotional current, that is otherwise perhaps not there. I mean, you could argue that no script has a heart until actors are delivering it. But that's what I think about that scene in particular. I do think that the film is remembered, rightly or wrongly, by that scene. It's and if I may, just to shift on or move on a little bit, let's use that scene as a starting point for another point. Is that another way in which this film feels like a very, very Tarantino film? Is that it's not a film. It's not only a film like full of character, but full of characters and character actors and or actors prior to their transition to stardom, if you like with regard to Bradley Pitt. Bradley Pitt, James Gandolfini, Dennis Hopper, Christopher Walken, like Tom Sizemore, Chris Penn, Gary Oldman, even Val Kilmer's in there. Even though I couldn't tell you who he actually plays because I missed him. Which
plays Elvis.
That's why I don't know that he's in it. So, in fact, each of these characters and actors are given sort of their respective screen time in standalone scenes. But this film's also about as episodic as I remember it being. Like, characters appear, they're introduced, we very quickly form some kind of relationship with them, and then they either disappear again as quickly as they've appeared, or they die outright. So, like, it gives us sort of scenes to sort of chew on. So, and that's very much the scene that, and that's very much, the case that the scene that we've just discussed. But then it just moves on, and that's after a certain while, problem for me to form a lasting sort of bond to the film and its material.
Would you describe it as episodic, though? Like, okay, I wouldn't, because there is a very simple and continuous single plot line. Okay, so when I started watching this again, I was really enjoying it at the beginning, except for the Elvis thing, which I find just kind of like arbitrary and quirky for no reason. I thought Clarence was quite a compelling character, obviously like partly based on Tarantino, and this is partly like the film kind of starts out as kind of like what you can imagine kind of being like Tarantino's romantic fantasy, and like at that time, whatever, when he was working as a video store clerk. And I think the film is really good until it becomes a crime film. So I think the romance stuff at the beginning is really good, and then it takes a kind of a weird turn when Clarence decides that he's going to go and kill this pimp Drexel. Like, first of all, like, Clarence is a comic book store clerk and like movie nerd and Elvis nerd, and suddenly he's like this like hardened criminal type who's able to go into this. It's a weird character shift, and I don't know why it happens. Whether there's sort of from that early script, The Open Road, maybe there was more of a gradual kind of thing where because obviously it was going to transition into some sort of version of Natural Born Killers later on, and kind of a Bonnie and Clyde thing, and then he kind of, as the film goes on, he's kind of he becomes too cool, which becomes part of the theme as well. I think it's funny that you made the criticism that Bruce Willis was too cool in The Last Boy Scout. I'm saying Christian Slater. But the thing is, I don't think Christian Slater is cool. I don't think Christian Slater is a good actor. I also don't think Patricia Arquette is a good actor. I don't particularly like either of them in this, particularly once it becomes a crime film. And then, okay, so the title of the early script was The Open Road. Okay, so once we get past that Dennis Hopper sequence that we heard, and they leave Detroit, it's literally the open road, right? So the story could go anywhere. They go to LA, and then the remainder of the film is all about them trying to sell the drugs that they stole from Drexel. And okay, fine, but who are they going to sell it to? They're selling it to this like movie producer who made like this like Apocalypse Now style war film, and is a wealthy, successful Hollywood type, but for some reason is also like a distributor of drugs for some reason. He's not just like, he doesn't want them just for personal use or for his parties or something like that. He seems to be like, some sort of gangster as well, which I think is a weird choice. But it's just, it kind of there are endless possibilities once they leave Detroit, and I think it's a pity that it settles on a story that's so dull. And what the characteristic that you described as episodic, I find to be kind of just fragmented.
Yeah, maybe episodic is the wrong word. Maybe what I mean by that is the film that I'm describing is a film that makes a set piece of each scene. So you've got the Walken Hopper standoff. You've got like Gandolfini and Patricia Arquette's hotel room, like thrown off through mirrors and stuff. That's what
the best
I mean.
scene in the film, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's the best scene in LA, at least. Yeah. That's the only scene in LA that I really like. But the whole thing with the movie mogul's assistant, who the cops get to, and like he's undercover, and it's like he's not the protagonist, and like there's no tension. I don't care about and at that point, like the theme of the film has kind of seemingly arbitrarily shifted over to Alabama thinking that Clarence is like so cool, he's so cool, and there's like this voiceover. Like, when did that happen? Like, I don't know. It doesn't. I know what you mean. The whole second half of the movie just doesn't really work for me. It just fizzles out, and then it ends on this it ends with this like 3-way Mexican standoff thing, which is like almost recreated exactly and to a much better effect in a film we're going to talk about later on this episode. But yeah, and then the other problem is, and I actually forgotten this, is that that's the only scene we get with Christopher Walken, and he's so good, and he's so scary, and he's such a potentially great antagonist, and he's just gone. It's like Christopher Walken.
Yeah. I mean, how do I follow up that? As I said, so great characters are introduced and then they either disappear or die outright. Like, Walken's character doesn't die. His goons continue to show up in California or whatever, but he just disappears, which heightens, in retrospect, when he doesn't reappear, the sense that this is episodic. Even though I get your arguments against that being like
when on the Singleton episode we talked about Poetic Justice, which is another kind of road movie, and that I would describe as episodic because they stop here and they have one experience and that has no bearing on what happens next. Whereas this is one kind of cause and effect plot thing. It's like the whole second half of the movie is just about them trying to sell the drugs and being pursued by the.
I get it, and accept it.
Is it Gandolfini who's the leader then? He's the main guy, whatever. Anyway, he's certainly the strong presence then later on, and then the cops are introduced and it's Tom Sizemore and like that whole underdeveloped. The whole I like the first half of this movie. I love the first 30 minutes maybe, and it just fizzles out, and I realized watching it this time that's the reason that I never really took to it 100%, is because I presumably I've always felt that way. I've always felt that the second half of the movie just to very little effect.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, Lovers on the Run films for me are always dependent upon the central couple's chemistry. I think it's a pretty likable duo. Like Slater's endearingly virginal almost as this nerd, and Arquette's this manic pixie dream girl, or how Tarantino might envisage one. I agree. Like the deciding factor in the dramatic plausibility of it is the inciting incident, in which Clarence not only kills Drexel but goes to confront him in the first place.
And also, but just like his criminal aptitude.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Like they do have the plot device of like, oh, he left his driver's license behind, and then when Christopher Walken finds his dad by finding his address, then he kills Dennis Hopper, and then they're like, find out where that kid went, and then Dennis Hopper has written the address of Michael Rappaport in California on the fridge. It was like, well, okay.
Yeah, I mean, you might argue that these are the actions of a cinephile whose like naivety, even old school sense of like gentlemanly conduct are rooted in his love of films and some sort of fairy tale. Like, in fact, nothing in this film, save maybe for the Hollywood setting later on, like ties it to a specific setting or period, which reaffirms the lovers on the run trope as very much universal. But anyway, I accept your arguments against this film. What would you give it out? What would you give it out of 10?
6.
Okay, well that's actually higher than I was expecting, given your qualms.
Like I said, I like the first half. I do like the first half. I like everything that's set in Detroit, and I think the first act, let's say, up to and including really the Drexel thing, but it's the second half of the movie that just doesn't really work for me.
Well, I had it down as an 8, but you've sort of put forward there a pretty persuasive argument. So I'm going to give it a 3. No, I'm just joking. Fuck off. It's not that easy. No, I'm gonna go high 7 on this.
So 7.
Yeah.
Okay, one unproduced project to briefly mention in this interim period was an adaptation of Clifford Irving's historical fiction novel Tom Mix and Pancho Villa, which was about actor Tom Mix's involvement with Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa and his supposedly joining Villa's army in the fight against dictator Porfirio Diaz in the bloody Mexican civil wars of the early 20th century. And in terms of the actual historical record, well, it's known that Mix did spend time in Mexico during that violent era and had mentioned years later that he had in fact met Villa. It's not known if their association was as close as Irving claimed it was in the novel. That was a screenplay by Oliver Stone, and it was a project that Scott became attached to at this point, but was still developing as late as 2003. So it became kind of a passion project for him, but it was an extremely expensive production to mount, and obviously never got off the ground. Okay, and so his next film after True Romance was 1995's Crimson Tide.
Just so we understand each other, I don't have any problems with questions or doubts. As I said to you before, I'm not seeking the company of kiss asses. But you got something to say to me, you say it in private. And if privacy doesn't permit itself, then you bite your fucking tongue. Are we clear about that, Commander?
As a bell, sir.
Those sailors out there are just boys. Boys who are training to do a terrible and unthinkable thing. And if that ever occurs, the only reassurance they'll have that they're doing the proper thing is going to derive from their unqualified belief in the unified chain of command. That means we don't question each other's motives in front of the crew. It means we don't undermine each other. It means in a missile drill, they hear your voice right after mine without hesitation. Do you agree with that policy, sailor?
Absolutely, sir.
We're here to preserve democracy, not to practice it.
Okay, so Crimson Tide, written by Michael Schiffer from a story by Schiffer and Richard P. Henrik, produced by Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer for Hollywood Pictures and Simpson Bruckheimer, and distributed by the Disney subsidiary Buena Vista Pictures. It was produced for a budget of $53 million and grossed $160 million worldwide, $157 million worldwide, and was released in the US in May of 1995 and in the UK and Ireland in November of 1995. Okay, so the premise here: after the Cold War, a breakaway Russian republic with nuclear warheads becomes a possible worldwide threat. U.S. submarine captain Frank Ramsey, played by Gene Hackman, signs on a relatively green but highly recommended Lieutenant Commander Ron Hunter, played by Denzel Washington, to the USS Alabama, which may be the only ship able to stop a possible Armageddon. When Ramsey insists that the Alabama must act aggressively, Hunter, fearing that they will start rather than stop a disaster, leads a potential mutiny to stop him. So this was my second time watching this movie, and I wasn't particularly enthusiastic about revisiting it. I didn't really have particularly fond memories of it. I remember being pretty indifferent to it the first time,
right?
Which was a long time ago. But I really, really enjoyed it. I think it's obviously it's a two-hander, and there were stretches of the movie where I was envisioning it being staged as a play. Mm-hmm. I think you could very easily do that, and I think it could be quite effective.
Yeah.
But you know, it's like the movie. It really begins and ends with the fact that Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington are both amazing in this.
Washington, Hackman are so good. Like Washington pulling off the Star Trek and Silver Surfer references that Quentin Tarantino actually had an uncredited hand in writing some of that dialogue in this film. Like pulling off those kinds of scenes is never going to be easy, and Washington like imbues it with so much like heart, and I'm like, I keep saying that on this episode, I'm so sorry, but like and Hackman against them is, I mean, just Hackman. I should say at the outset that I saw this originally when I bought the VHS, when I very much had come to terms with the fact that Gene Hackman was my favorite actor, and the only person who's really challenged that since is somebody who I'd forgotten was in this film. We mentioned him on the last segment, is James Gandolfini. And the fact that, you know, the scene in which Gandolfini visits Hackman in his cabin, and like Gandolfini's face is a little obscured, and I was like, oh no, is it actually him though? Because I want confirmation that my two favorite actors were in the same room. Like Viggo Mortensen as well, who plays the weapons officer on the submarine, INS, otherwise referred to as WEPS, as the acronym for weapons officer, is also great, and he plays a sort of moral pivot, which we'll get to. Then you've got Lilo Brancato Jr., who's still very much sort of the up and coming star here. It's post Bronx Tale, prior to The Sopranos. And then you've got George Zunza as well, from who I know primarily from The Deer Hunter, who's also great as the chief of the boat. So I also like this film.
Also addressed by his acronym.
Yes,
COB.
Yeah. There's a built-in challenge here, right? So how do you dramatize the global, earth-changing ramifications of a human drama contained to an underwater vessel, right? We covered it on the Bigelow episode with K-19 Widowmaker, which I think compares to this very unfavorably. I think this is a far superior film. Have you seen Failsafe by Sidney Lumet?
No.
Well, that film plays very much on the idea...
I'm saving it for our Journeymen episode.
On episodes, and it's going to be about fucking 10 of them. So that film plays on the idea of mutually assured destruction in the context of the Cold War, as expressed in a series of essentially telephone calls between Henry Fonda, who plays the US president, and his Russian counterpart. That film sort of... it's similarly claustrophobic, but the specific tension comes from the fact that the nukes are already on their way, and the president's trying to sort of stop them. They're on their way, like to Russia, due to a system malfunction, the eponymous fail-safe system. While here, it's whether or not to fire missiles in light of a communication that's been sort of cut short. So they've received their orders to go to DEFCON 2, I think, and then another communication comes through just as they're rocked by a torpedo that they managed to avert, which puts their radio signal.
They're trying to evade. They're trying to evade a hunter killer, a Kula class hunter killer or something like that. Yeah. They have to go so deep that they lose their signal, and then they float a buoy, or a buoy, as we would say, to receive the radio signal. But then there's like it's a torpedo, isn't it?
Yes.
It breaks the cable.
So at some point, the weakness or limitations in terms of perspective has to somehow become a strength. And you do that by creating contrasts, like very, very simple terms. So like there's the hunter, like the greenhorn, like borderline theoretician against Ramsey, who's like a wartime vet, young, old. But then there's also, and this comes back to Viggo Mortensen, who plays Weps, like who's also Hunter, Washington's pal, but also like pivotal point in the ship's hierarchy and therefore the film's moral balance. Like that scene when he's confronted by Gandolfini and Matt Craven, who plays Lieutenant Roy Zimmer. Well, Gandolfini, sorry, plays the surprise officer. Craven plays the communications officer, and they confront Mortensen's character because they're loyal to the captain, and they ask Mortensen to think of his family, and he says, "I am." Like, it hasn't even occurred to them that there's a flip side to their approach to this situation. So I honestly think that this is the best script that Scott's had to work with in the context of where we're at in terms of covering his career on these 3 episodes. Like, maybe it'll turn out at the end of our 3 episodes on Scott that this is actually the best script that he ever worked with, or that he ever got to direct. Sorry, like. There's a beautiful, for me, like totally harmonious conceptual continuity here between character and narrative, by which, like, I mean, characterization here is through action. Like, obviously that applies to most scripts, but here it's so contained. Like, so you've got the ways in which action itself explicates for us the various procedures that, for instance, a US submarine might or does have to go through in order to launch nuclear missiles, at least in 1995. Like, Ramsey orders a test launch in order to test Hunter, which allows us to get familiarized with the kind of complicated mechanisms and narrative order that needs to happen for the final stages to be so tense, so that we can sort of be swept along by them when it does happen and enjoy it in a kind of uncritically joyous fashion, if I may say so. I think it's kind of ingenious, the script, actually. I love this film. I think it's great.
Yeah, no, I find films set between the end of the Cold War and 9/11 that have this kind of geopolitical, these kind of geopolitical aspirations to be very interesting in how they position everybody. Mm-hmm. Because one of the films we're gonna talk about a little bit later is could be spoken about in the same kind of context. But yeah, the focus on protocol and procedure, and like chain of command, and like how everything should run like clockwork according to those rules. It's like a micro macro kind of thing. So you've got this like global, like standoff happening, mm-hmm. where everybody knows that, you know, everything could kind of erupt in chaos at any moment, and then you've got this like, you know, micro scenario that is governed by these procedures, so long as it remains connected to the broader scenario, and then it's cut off. And it's like you watch how it breaks down. Would you agree that the film would be stronger if it were more balanced in terms of who's right? Because their positions, you can see both sides, mm-hmm. but you're never on anyone's side but Denzel's.
Yeah, and even some sort of sign, although it would be incredibly difficult to dramatize, I think, but some sort of sign that they do see each other's position during the actual tensions themselves. Like, I think Hackman is the kind of actor who can kind of humanize. He could humanize a genocidal dictator, if he was ever to play one. Maybe he did. I don't know. Like, so there's a hint of vulnerability in Ramsey when he is mutinied against and sent to his cabin. I think it also helps that he has a Jack Russell dog. But yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree that the film is very, very much tipped in favor of Hunter, as played by Washington. Yeah, maybe it could have been strengthened by some sort of nuance. I think it sort of frees itself up from that difficulty by having Mortensen's character there, and even Zunza's character, who does side with Washington, but not because he thinks he's right. He thinks it's because Hackman's wrong in flouting the protocol. Yeah,
that's a great scene. I really like that scene where Hackman wants to launch and he can't, like, by the book he can't launch without his XO's agreement, and Hunter refuses to give his agreement, so Hackman, or Frank Ramsey, decides that he's gonna replace him. He's gonna replace him. He's gonna basically like replace him with is it with Zimmer? He says whoever it is, one of his lieutenants. He's gonna basically just like promote one of his lieutenants to executive officer, and they have this like standoff, and then Hunter orders Cobb to arrest Ramsey, and he assumes command, and that's what happens. And then afterwards, he goes up to Cobb and thanks him, and Cobb says, "Thank you, fuck you."
Yeah.
You know, like, I'm not on your side, and you know, you may be right, you may be wrong, but the captain can't just replace you at will.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. It's very focused on its kind of underlying theme. What do you think about the weird racial turn that it takes at the end?
With the reference to the horses, the living...
The horses, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that was a Tarantino contribution?
Well, when I heard that Tarantino, I mean, I watched it knowing that he was uncredited, but I didn't really know what for, and then apparently it was all the pop cultural references in the script.
Yeah.
And while I was watching the film, without knowing specifically what he'd written, that did leap out at me as the kind of conversational, like, referential framework that Tarantino positions all of his sort of standoffs in.
I would be surprised.
Does it?
No, there's a reference to it later when
in the closing scene.
It's incidental. It's color, you know, but it's. I'd be very surprised if that's not Tarantino. And actually, I think the stuff that Tarantino added to it is really bad. It doesn't fit at all,
doesn't it? Yeah.
It dates it, but it also it dates it. It just makes it sound like somebody, like, you know, aping Tarantino. Like, there's also the thing near the beginning where Gandolfini and Mortensen are playing this like pop quiz game where they're naming classic submarine movies, and the other guy has to name the leads of that movie. You know, and it's like, oh, okay. You know, Robert Towne was also an uncredited script doctor on this, and he contributed the really great dinner scene where Hackman is kind of sizing up Washington and asking him for his opinion on the dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Washington Hunter is basically, you know, for the first time really kind of like demonstrating the kind of value or the application of his academic background and his, you know, his he ends up saying that, you know, in the nuclear age, the true enemy can't be defeated, because in the nuclear age the true enemy is war itself, which I think is a great line.
Yeah, and the reference point there is Karl von Clausewitz, the Prussian army general, as opposed to like a fucking Shogun film or whatever. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Surfer.
Yeah, I didn't know that Robert Towne had worked on this, actually. It's good to know.
I also I'm looking forward to going back and revisiting the Simpsons episode Simpson Tide, where Homer and his friends join the Navy and get swept up in a nuclear misunderstanding with Russia and everything.
Right.
I haven't watched that with Crimson Tide fresh in my mind. Also, I think there's a hilarious moment towards the end of this movie where everyone on the ship is celebrating the fact that the crisis has been averted, and we get a shot of James Gandolfini, and he looks gutted. He looks like his heart is breaking that there's not going to be a nuclear war.
Yeah, I mean, like, he is the most sort of zealous of the counter-mutineers, isn't he?
Yes.
He's the one who takes the...
Well, he's a mutineer, because what Hunter does is not a mutiny.
Yeah, of course, sure.
Yeah, so that's actually by the book. What Hackman, what Ramsey does with his conspirators is the actual mutiny.
Yeah.
Despite what I actually read out in the synopsis at the beginning. Okay, all right. So, like, what do you think out of 10?
9.
A 9.
Yeah, first 9 of
9. Is that the first 9 you've ever given?
Yeah.
Ever?
It's the first film I've ever seen that I've given 9 out of 10 to.
Yeah.
No, it is. It's a 9.
Well, I mean, that's absolutely that's a lock now for your number 1 when we rank all these movies at the end. There's no way you're giving 2 9s on one episode.
Well,
although there is another Gene Hackman movie in this list.
Yes, there is.
Okay, I'm gonna go with an 8 here.
Okay.
Yeah, very good. Okay, let's move on to our 4th film in this episode, The Fan.
What do I say?
Oh, I was just there. You would have done the same thing.
Man, I lose this guy, man. I don't know what I would do. Looks good on you. I don't know about them pants, though.
Oh, yours.
Can I get you anything?
A beer.
Yeah? All right. I could swear. Have I seen you before?
Well, I get that all the time. I got one of those faces, I guess.
Oh. You like baseball?
Oh, I'm not obsessed with it or anything. Are you a player?
Yeah.
You are?
Yeah.
Barrett Bonds?
Oh. No. I'm Bobby Rayburn. Yeah.
I was just kidding.
It's okay. Wow. At least you're not one of them diehard, baseball fans. Really.
Why's that?
Because those guys are losers.
Aren't the fans what it's all about?
Shit. Tell you something, man. The fans are like women. When you're hitting, they love you. When you're not, they just as soon to spit on you as look at you.
Oh, why's that?
Because they don't understand that you're the same person whether you're hitting or you're not. Only person you should play for is yourself.
So The Fan was written by Fief Sutton and based on a novel by Peter Abrahams of the same name, and it was produced by Wendy Feineman for Mandalay Entertainment and Scott Free Productions. Distributed by TriStar Pictures and released in the UK and Ireland November 1996. As per Google, the synopsis: a troubled salesman who peddles knives, Gil Renard, played by Robert De Niro, has a volatile personality which has resulted in divorce and a strained relationship with his young son. The one thing that Renard cares passionately about is baseball, particularly the San Francisco Giants and the team's newest recruit, Bobby Rayburn, played by Wesley Snipes. As Renard's personal life continues to crumble, he begins obsessively tracking Rayburn, leading to kidnapping and even murder. Now, this film was made for $55 million, and it grossed domestically 18.6 million. Another commercial flop for Tony Scott. Was it or was it not deserving of such a fate?
In my opinion, no. I think this is really good.
Do you?
Yeah. I think Robert De Niro is amazing in it.
Oh, really?
I love his performance in this. And I think every single moment that he spends with his kid is just like... So it's like... when we talked about the scene in The Last Boy Scout between Bruce Willis and Daniel Harris...
Yeah,
it's like that without any sort of like underlying, kind of jocular quality, and like with the emotional abuse like ratcheted way up, and it's so uncomfortable and so riveting. Yeah, I think he's great in this.
But would you agree then, if we take that as a starting point for the discussion, would you agree that it's to the film's detriment that seems to disappear after a while?
Which?
His relationship to his son.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the film definitely gradually sort of transforms into a different kind of movie as it goes on.
Yeah, it does.
And I think that's the reason. That's part of the reason. I think it's like it's halfway between being a character study and a psychological thriller, and it's probably alienated people who are coming for both of those things.
Yes.
I happen to like both of those types of films, though, and I don't like. On our Darren Aronofsky episode, I said that I love, when we were talking about Fortune Cookie, I said that I love stories about salesmen. So I also love that aspect of the movie. And I also love, like, that kind of, like, you know, Michael Douglas and Falling Down kind of thing. Like,
yeah, I
know,
very much got a Falling Down vibe, yeah.
So, yes, that kind of, like, archetype as well. But then also I love people who are completely obsessed with a particular sort of cultural thing into which they kind of long to escape, but what they're actually longing for is an escape into like a better past, or like a past that never was. Because he's also like a former baseball player, right? He's like, I wasn't 100% sure, like he might have played in, I don't know anything about baseball, so I don't know what I'm talking about, but he's like, the way he talks about his past, he played with people who went on to be professional players or something like that, and he didn't. He went into his father's knife business or whatever it was, and then eventually he gets kind of squeezed out and fired, and he's trying to kind of indoctrinate his son into the same kind of love of baseball that he has, but it's to call it a love of baseball, it's like it's like borderline psychotic nostalgia, you know, like nostalgia is anyway kind of has that potential, that potential energy, you know. It's like you're literally longing for something that doesn't and can't ever exist. So it's a kind of an irrational impulse anyway, longing for the past. But he's like taking it to like like a really not just an like without the kid in the movie, I don't think I would like it really very much at all. It's like that's really the linchpin of the whole thing for me.
Yeah, well, okay, I agree with all of that. At the risk of blaspheming, I was on the verge of saying De Niro might be miscast here, actually,
Really?
because of the difficulties with which the film segues and makes it shift. So, like, we've seen him play unstable characters, obviously. We've seen him play Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, and outright fucking psychopaths like Max Cady in Cape Fear, right? But here, like early on at least, he has to play a character who's somewhere in between. So somebody who has the potential, so somebody who's sort of rooted more towards the Bickle end of things, although he's very much also Rupert Pupkin from The King of Comedy, but also has to establish that he has the potential to become more like Max Cady. Like someone who's just about socially functional, but who hasn't yet gone to the point of no return. Like, although obviously I'm sure many would argue that his emotionally abusive behaviour towards his son and ex-wife are enough grounds to fucking castrate him right there and then, or something. But I'm not sure De Niro pulls off the early scenes as a baseball nerd. Like it's
when he's driving around and calling into the radio.
Bobby! The radio. Yeah, Bobby! It's just funny, like Bobby De Niro shouting, Bobby, Bobby! Like, you know, have you seen the YouTube supercuts of all the mentions of Bobby in the film when he's like, Bobby?
That's how you should introduce me on the podcast.
And I'm here with my co-host, Bobby!
Bobby!
So, right. It's a tricky role, I get it, right? And it asks him to play Pupkin and Cady both at once. Rupert Pupkin, Max Cady.
He's never
or at least
quite
one
Max
of them
Cady,
in such a way that segueing into the other is plausible. So that
he's never Max Cady though. He never reaches that. He's never as calculated or.
When he fucking shows up at the end, like on the baseball pitch in baseball garb, having like, you know, I think that's very Max Cady-ish.
All right, that's close. Yeah, I wasn't thinking about that scene. I was thinking about the scenes before that where he like abducts his son. That seems more kind of impulsive and unhinged than malicious, you know, and calculated in the way that Max Cady is throughout Cape Fear. But yeah, I know what you mean. When he turns up and like, yeah, that's okay, sure.
So like it's I think there's two conflicting films here competing for screen time, like a send-up of sports fandom and celebrity, and then a social realist drama about a guy struggling with severe anger issues. But then those anger issues, and this is what I think frustrates me with the film, like, because it establishes all of that as a framework, but then never really interrogates it to a way that's satisfying for me, at least. Like, not only does he have severe anger issues and whatever else, but though it's hinted at that those may or may not be related to his work, his workplace, and his position within the means of production and whatever else, and the stresses and pressures that are concomitant with that. But so what do you make?
Are you asking? Is this a Marxist film?
And if it's not, then I don't like it. But no, what I was going to ask is, what do you make of, so early on, like, because obviously Wesley Snipes is the co-lead here. So, and early on especially, you've got parallels between Gil's daily work routine and Bobby Rayburn's daily routine. The former being built around like a fucking thankless existence in
as a salesman,
and the other, enjoying a lavish, lucrative lifestyle, which includes public appearances and boosting, one's brand, like through social capital, like visiting a children's ward to visit a young cancer patient and so on and so forth. But the parallels are pushed to an almost satirical degree, like the rapid editing, the heightened tone of it, like, and the insistence upon the differences between these characters. Like, neither, and I like it as a starting point conceptually that neither character is particularly likable, which makes it feel at the outset like it's a film that's going to attack a system rather than one of the characters. Which, so conceptually, I think it certainly has potential. Something, I'm sad to say, feels amiss.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's unsure what exactly to do with the premise, and it doesn't ultimately stick the landing. But there's more than enough in here for me to thoroughly enjoy it. And I would agree at the point where Gil shows up at Bobby's beach house is the point where the film just like very abruptly changes character. Even literally in the sense of a couple of hilariously blatant stand-ins that you sent me.
Yeah, so the scene in which De Niro goes running like David Hasselhoff into the sea to save Wesley Snipes' son. Like, firstly, there's an underwater shot. We get it. This is, an industry that will never send Robert De Niro into the ocean. It'll obviously have stand-ins, or in this case, swim-ins, but there's a shot under the water of what looks like Hugh Jackman swimming with Wesley Snipes' son, and then like an it's not even a quick cutaway.
No.
It's
I couldn't believe that I didn't notice
shot
it.
of Wesley Snipes standing.
It's like 2 or 3 seconds
of him looking panicked and confused in the water with his head above the water. And it's obviously not Wesley Snipes. And then later on in the film, when he's kidnapped his son, Wesley Snipes' son, De Niro's like pitching, and he's got his old pal from his old baseball team to play catch. Forgive my lack of baseball jargon. And there's like an inexplicable, and I mean like inexplicable jump cut from De Niro like about to pitch the ball to like a shot with an actor whose face is like half covered, but it's in slow motion, the shot, and it's clearly not Robert De Niro. And it does it twice, but the first one is particularly egregious. And I was like, whoa, like, what the fuck? Like, who's that? And I thought for a moment, because it goes slow motion, I thought it was going to cut back to a flashback of a scene from his past that had sort of traumatized him, and that would like explain his psychological
like that was his father
or whatever. Yeah. But I don't think it is. I don't think that's in any way like justifiable as why.
No, like unless that was in there in other scenes or something like that got cut and that was left. But no, I mean, like with that, if that's the case, what's with the Wesley Snipes double who doesn't look anything like? But also, like, you're saying that they wouldn't send Robert De Niro underwater. I mean, like they can do it in a water tank. I mean, Robert De Niro, I'm sure can whatever, but. He like this actor is just standing like waist deep in the water or whatever. It's so fun.
Yes, it is. It's hilarious. And once you see it, it's one of those things that, like, if I ever have the pleasure of watching this in a cinema now, like in the future, like a 35mm, when we arrange and organise and curate our Tony Scott 1990s retrospective, and pull together the resources and money required of it. When we screen that in public, I'm just going to fucking burst out laughing when those scenes come on. Honestly.
Do you think you could do a modern remake of this film, where the fan is like, like a Star Wars fan, or like a DC Comics fan who's trying to get the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League released, that kind of thing? Like, because that's what I was thinking when it was like that kind of like total like obsessive immersion and like identity construction around like the word, I don't know when the word fandom was coined, but it seems like a neologistic. But that kind of thing, yeah. Like his without baseball, like his life, probably my favorite scene in the film is when he's driving his kid to the baseball game, and he's in the same breath, like sincerely trying to bond with his kid.
Yeah. But
the only thing he knows how to talk about, and the only thing he understands, and the only thing he can emotionally connect with is baseball. Yeah. So the kid is interested, but like not to his satisfaction.
Sure.
And then he has a baseball glove, and Gil asks him where he got it, and he says that he got it from his new stepfather.
Yeah.
And Gil says it's a piece of shit. And it's like, oh, it's really hard to watch, but riveting.
Yeah, and I love how the stepdad is in it as well, and more could have been made of it. And those tensions, and yeah, like the moments that tease at Gil's sort of struggle to be a father, like I'm much more drawn to that.
Like when he locks himself in the room. Like he's supposed okay, so he's like we mentioned falling down, where things keep piling up on him. He is not a very good salesman, and his like track record over the past whatever time period has been really bad, and he's kind of given one last chance with this big account that he's supposed to close or whatever. And he is trying to make arrangements to meet the guy, but he's also not willing to not go to the opening game of the series. Yeah, and so he has to take his son to opening day, and then he has to leave. But I love that scene as well, where he's trying to leave, but he's so into the game that he never gets more than like 2 feet before he turns back to the game. And at one point, even runs back into the seats to try to grab a whatever they call those. Whatever. I don't know. Should have looked up the jargon before we recorded this. A ball that comes into the stands. But he eventually he leaves too late, and he's in traffic, and he gets there, and the guy is gone, and that's how he loses his job. But that means that he left his kid at the stadium, and this stranger took him home, and then his wife, who pretty much hates him, his ex-wife, who pretty much hates him, says that he violated the terms of his visitation rights, and that she's going to get a restraining order, and that she's like going to protect her son from him and all that kind of stuff. And he just barges into the house, goes into the kids' room, and locks the door. And like the two parents are trying to get in and trying to get him out of there, and they're just like talking about call the police. And he's simultaneously trying to apologize to and bond with his kid by bringing him his favorite pizza and his favorite soda, and at the same time like hurling abuse back out the door, telling him to call the fucking police, and all that kind of stuff. All that is just great.
And it's a great little performance. It's a great performance. It's a great performance by Little Richie as well, right? Played by Andrew J. Birchland, because he's torn between crying, like legitimately as an instinctive response to this fucking horrible behavior that he doesn't understand, and in many ways he's more emotionally developed than his own father. But also wanting to connect with his dad, and so that he's in that same scene, he's like, pleased of the, I think Gil gives him permission to drink Coke because his stepdad hasn't. Yeah. He's like, it's okay, they can't get in, and he's like, he laughs and he's like relieved. I don't know. I think I ultimately wanted to love this film, and certain aspects in isolation I do, but as a whole, it doesn't cohere. and I don't know why. And maybe I need another pass at it. And I wish there was a baseball term that I could use to compete with your earlier reference to Christopher Walken that I could say in I haven't. For me, it's gonna be like oh fuck! I hate being held to account when we get to the ends of episodes and rate and rank the filmmakers' works, because I feel like I need to stick to the score that I'm going to give it, but it's a 6.
Okay. I'm going to go with a 7.
Okay.
All right, so let's move on to the final film on this episode, 1998's Enemy of the State.
I mean, you know, we got the blimp cam, we got the police officer cam, we've got 2 ATM cameras, but this is the one showing promise. This is the security camera at the underwear store. Freeze there. Rotate us 75 degrees around the vertical, please. Freeze there. Times 10. Focus on the drop. Enhance, then forward, frame by frame. All right. Now, just before the view's blocked, there's a shape change in Dean's bag. See the shadow variance? See? The shadow's wrong. Zavit's changed the configuration of Dean's packages.
Is it a tape?
It's hard to say for sure. These things are...
Computer take us around to the other side?
It can hypothesize, Chris.
Yeah?
Can you rotate us 75 degrees around the vertical, please?
What do you think it is?
It looks a lot bigger than the tape.
Zavitz had digital compression equipment in his apartment. He could have downloaded it to anything.
Or maybe the bag twisted in Dean's hand. Or something moved in front of the light and altered the shadow. Maybe it's nothing.
Maybe it's everything. Let's get it and find out.
All right, so final film, Enemy of the State, written by David Marconi, produced by Jerry Bruckheimer for Touchstone Pictures, Jerry Bruckheimer Films, and Scott Free Productions, and distributed again by Buena Vista. Released in the US in November of 1998 and in the UK and Ireland in December of 1998. This was a big hit. It had a budget of $90 million and it grossed over $250 million worldwide. And the premise here, corrupt National Security Agency official Thomas Reynolds, played by John Voight, has a congressman assassinated to assure the passage of expansive new surveillance legislation. When a videotape of the murder ends up in the hands of Robert Clayton Dean, played by Will Smith, a labor lawyer and dedicated family man, he is framed for murder. With the help of ex-intelligence agent Edward Brill Lyle, played by Gene Hackman, Dean attempts to throw Reynolds off his trail and prove his innocence. Right, so I saw this film, I think I saw it in the cinema when it came out, and really enjoyed it. And I've seen it many times since, and it's easily the Tony Scott film that I've seen the most number of times. And I love it. I think it's great from beginning to end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's...
I love life falling apart movies, where like, you know, every like somebody has like this perfectly functioning life, and then all of that is kind of like gradually stripped away. Like I think crystallized in that great image of like Will Smith in a hotel bathrobe, like holding a gun, running through a tunnel in traffic.
Yeah, it's a great image. Yeah.
It has the film is like riveting, I think, on the level of character, plot, and action. So like there are a number of like really like that foot chase that I just referred to. Actually, that's toward the end of that foot chase. Foot chases, car chases. Just like tight, tense kind of surveillance and like intrusion scenes as well. And the use of the kind of control room or God's eye narrative device, I think, is very kind of like, it's inherently kind of energetic or something like that. Actually, I'm sorry, not inherently. It could actually be quite boring if it wasn't directed properly. But
sure,
I think the interplay between like, you know, they're coming back, get out of there quick, that kind of thing. That's
yeah. I mean, in terms of theme and look, this film is so 1990s. Like, you've got fucking Scott Caan, Seth Green, Jamie Kennedy, Jason Lee, and Jack Black, most of whom play nerdy bad guys, by the way. And like, you know, Jack Black's wearing like, I think, an Hawaiian shirt for most of the film. And you've got those cutaways to satellites above Earth whenever someone falls under suspicion and or is wanted by the government. And then you've got, like, as you said, like a rapid procession through computer imagery, and like an almost hilarious investment in the panoptic, all-seeing possibilities of CCTV. Like in the clip that we just heard in the lingerie store. Well, it's not in the lingerie store. They're looking at imagery of the lingerie store, and they're trying to figure out if the bag changes shape when something's dropped in it. Like all of which immediately dates a film, and it dates this one specifically, but which also makes it seem actually quite prescient now, like in retrospect. I don't think there's any reason why the themes of surveillance and the surveillance state need to be speechified in the way that they are. Like, so, like the MacGuffin here, or what should be, and we'll come back to this actually, what should be a MacGuffin but isn't. Like, so as you said in the premise there, the legislation that John Voight's character wants to advance, or the bill that he wants to be passed, is to do with surveillance, isn't it? There's no real reason why that should be the case, though, because you can have just about anything and still have Will Smith's character fall under the suspicion of the NSA to the degree that he does, right? So it feels like an unnecessary layer to the script.
Yeah, but I mean, the congressman has to be murdered for some reason, though.
Sure.
By another, like, big political figure.
But I mean, it could be like, it doesn't have to be like for political purposes or something like that.
Well, I mean, if it was like a personal thing, like, that would be kind of, because he's supposed to be using like government resources to carry out this murder, and he has like a kind of his own little cabal within the government. Because when he reaches out to the rest of the team that we see throughout the movie, he says to tell them that it's a training op. Now, at a certain point, they have to be aware that it isn't anymore, and they seem to be kind of on board with it, even though they know at that point that it couldn't possibly be a training op, because, like, like Jason Lee's character gets killed pretty quickly, run over by a fire truck. So, at that point, you would think they'd probably call the op off. I don't know. But they seem to be kind of on board with it. They kind of... He doesn't really tell them why they're doing what they're doing, but they seem to be just enjoying doing what they're doing. To introduce a sort of a convincing reason for that murder to take place, why not have it be thematically tied to the movie? Why would you introduce it on the basis of another theme? Some other bill that has nothing to do with surveillance.
Well, the first half of this film feels very plotty to me.
Well, I mean, like, you could say the same thing about any conspiracy thriller, like, the Day of the Con.
That's true, but okay, so this is essentially a very typical Hitchcockian wrong man on the run film.
Another thing that I love actually is that type of story too. So
me too. That seems to spend, for me anyway, a little too much energy on making us care about what in Hitchcock's films was always a MacGuffin. Like, it needs more action and suspense for me, and less intrigue and intricacies to do with, like, firstly the mob, like the Pintero thing.
See, I love the Pintero thing. First of all, I think Tom Sizemore's performance is great, and secondly, I love the way that they're introduced, and throughout it provides an opportunity for Dean, Will Smith's character, to remain kind of naive and in the dark about what's really going on for much longer than he otherwise could, because they're the obvious culprits to him, because they've threatened him. He's kind of given them an ultimatum, and he throughout in fact, like, Gene Hackman doesn't show up for the first time until 55 minutes into this film, and then he disappears for a little while, and he comes back again 79 minutes in, and it's only at that point, so he's only really a major presence in the third act. That means that throughout the first two acts, Dean is under the impression that the mob is doing it. Because, like, at that point, he says, you think the mob uses devices like this? Like, so I actually love that.
And also, it's also in place eventually so that Dean can, Will Smith can exploit that situation to his advantage in the final scene when
Yeah.
he uses it to confuse John Voight and the NSA
Right.
by referring back to tapes because there's a duality there and doubling up.
Yeah. And then that's the scene that I mentioned when we were talking about True Romance, that, you know, builds to this really incredibly tense, like volatile sort of Mexican standoff between well, it's technically two parties, but we have two parties in the standoff, and then backup comes in and kind of effectively becomes a third party, and everything kind of erupts into gunfire. And it's really, I've always loved that scene.
Yeah.
Not as gory as the True Romance scene, but I think more effective.
Okay, so my problem here with the film... Oh, sorry, before we go any further, we should also mention, just to go back to the whole rapid fire editing, and visuals of the CCTV stuff in the 1990s computer stuff. It's the first time at which we get Tony Scott properly dabbling into those kinds of visuals that we'll encounter on the third and final episode of this three-parter, which kind of came to define the latter stages of his career and output. Okay, so my problem here is that it doesn't really come to life before Hackman shows up.
I totally disagree with you.
I know.
But sorry, go ahead.
Which leads me to ask, like, what do you think of Will Smith as a leading man in this film? I mean, this is on the back of Bad Boys, Independence Day, Men in Black, all of which were massive hits. This was also a hit. It's just before he made two commercial flops with The Legend of Bagger Vance and Ali.
And Wild Wild West as well.
Wild Wild West as well.
Yeah.
There's no denying that he's at the peak of his career here. My question pertains to whether or not you think this is the peak of his acting capabilities, or the kind of role, not necessarily capabilities, but like just the role that he plays. It's a relatively serious role, right?
Right, that's what I was going to say. I was like, I wouldn't compare him in this to him in Bad Boys or Men in Black.
Yeah.
It's a much more, I mean, what is it comparable to?
I mean, in his oeuvre, before or since?
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't really seen much of his output since.
Well, to take it in isolation, I think he's excellent in it. I think he is... I think we care about him. I think we believe him as a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And I also like the way that the Pintero mob subplot sets up his acumen as a lawyer, because he actually, when he starts to fight back in the second half of the movie, he does like draw on his experience as a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
But and I also think that the film has some really excellent comic relief. I'm sure you're gonna stonewall me here.
Well, I mean,
I think there's some very, very funny. I think there's some very, very funny one-liners in it.
Right.
I think he's great in it. I think I mean, like I said, it's hard to compare, because I mean, I also wouldn't compare this to something like Ali.
No.
Or something like iRobot or something like that. It's somewhere, but like it's essentially kind of pulpy fun with a serious register.
Yeah. I guess, and it's script based too, my qualms, because I guess it feels over. I can see why it's there, but for instance, like the subplot regarding his adultery and his basically the challenges that he faces in the film are not only to overcome the immediate threat of being under the NSA trying to kill him, but he has to also kind of win his family back in the process.
Mm-hmm. Much like The Last Boy Scout.
I don't know, and I find it a little distracting in the first half of the film. I'm kind of waiting, which okay, so let's move on from Will Smith, because that was just a question that I needed answered from you, rather than like.
What do you think? Do you not think he's...
I don't know. Maybe I just needed more, if anything, more humor there, or moments of levity, because
But there's a lot of that in the first half of the film.
Okay,
yes,
so
there is.
It doesn't really So anyway, I don't think it. I don't think it comes to life until Hackman shows up. So
do you think that the scene in the lingerie store is funny?
I mean, it's funny, but it feels like something from a sketch show to me. It doesn't really feel like a man who is married with a kid. It doesn't really feel like the kind of thing he would do.
Do you think that the running gag throughout the movie about his blender is funny?
Yeah, but does it ever come to light why he likes his blender?
No, I think that's what makes it funny. He just loves that blender.
I blend.
I blend, yeah. Some people meditate, you know.
Yeah. I was trying to think, what is it that feels amiss in this film? Because I do like it, and I had seen it before, by the way. And I do love the themes of it. I love the genre in which it's positioned. I love Gene Hackman, which I'm kind of building up to repeatedly, and I'm thinking, okay, what's wrong with this? And I think it's actually, and this feels actually the kind of commentary that you would put forth about a film rather than me, but it feels like a set piece or even two set pieces shy of being a very good film. I think it's good. Like, it's an hour in before, I'm going to say it again, before Hackman shows up, and then we get the first proper, what feels like the first proper set piece. The chase through the hotel is great.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the dressing gown run through the tunnel, but when he's like in the hotel, trying to run but also discard his clothes, which are obviously corrupted in some way in terms of being bugged. That's all great. It's all great. And then it's good and suspenseful. Even the moments of downtime thereafter when Hackman and Smith team up eventually, because they're essentially on the run and off grid, but we're kind of just waiting for trouble to find them again. I think especially because Hackman's cat is in tow. Like, have you ever noticed that pets are always a bad omen in Tony Scott's films? Like, especially in this one. Like, the dog at the very beginning of the film when Robarts gets killed and his car gets pushed into the lake. And then Smith's dog gets spray painted when the NSA burgle his home or ransack it. So, yeah, I need another action set piece.
What about the Jason Lee chase?
Yeah, but that doesn't involve Smith.
Well, it does.
Well, it does. It does. It comes to involve him. Yeah, okay. I mean, I like watching Barry Pepper at the height of his powers, chasing down good guys and being very good at being a sort of a ruthless villain or henchman. Yeah, I'll give you that one. Yeah, I would include that.
Do you think it's possible for you to watch a film in which Gene Hackman doesn't show up until halfway through and not find yourself impatiently waiting for Gene Hackman to show up?
I'm a Gene Hackman stan.
Yeah.
I had actually forgotten how long it takes for him to appear in this. I thought he figured much more prominently.
Yeah, in my head it was halfway through, but then when I actually timed it, it is halfway through that he first shows up, but then he disappears for another 20 minutes, and it's not. He's only really a presence in the third act.
You know that scene in which Gabriel Byrne shows up and
I love that scene,
as Brill.
Yeah.
Is he in the employment of the NSA?
Yes.
So because
they know that he's going to meet Rachel's contact, and then they send him in, and then later he's asked. Yeah, he takes one of the tracking devices out of one of his shoes. Yeah, there's some great wry lines as well, like where he throws one. Is it the last of his trackers he throws off the roof? And one of the guys that's just watching the tracker is like, I think he just committed suicide.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, it just feels. I don't know, of all the films that we've discussed on this episode, this feels the most dated, and I think for the reasons that I outlined. In terms of its themes and
what does dated mean though? I mean, because I was actually going to say, because we talked about Crimson Tide is clearly a post Cold War movie, and like that whole sensibility there. It's like what is the US relation to Russia now? And it has to be this paramilitary thing because the USSR has dissolved. Because I was going to say that this was the other film that I was referring to where. You can look at it from the other side, this interim period between the end of the Cold War and 9/11, where Crimson Tide is dealing with Crimson Tide is post World War post Cold War, and this is pre 9/11.
Yeah,
like all the, like the that kind of paranoia around surveillance and information technology, and I like the contrast. I like Brill as a character coming out of it's obviously like there's kind of like a notion around this movie as a kind of a spiritual successor to The Conversation.
Sure,
that he comes out of the 1970s, and it's like that era, and it's obviously harkening back to that to a certain extent. Anyway, okay, I just wanted to bring up one really weird moment that I noticed for the first time watching this movie.
Right.
You know the scene, the foot chase that you were talking about in the hotel. The scene where Barry Pepper and the other guy are coming down the corridor toward Will Smith, and Will Smith is pressed into the recess beside one of the doors, and he's like knocking on the door really quietly and saying the name of the person that he's reading off the menu or something. And then the guy, he opens the door. Okay, so there's a scene later on where they go back. They don't go back to that hotel, but they go to a hotel to break into the congressman's room, and those shots are reused. The shots of Will Smith up against the door, knocking on the door, and then we get this insert. You don't see Gene Hackman at all. You get this insert of a key card going into the lock, and then the door opens. But you can see it's the exact same shot, and you can see Barry Pepper and the other guy coming down the corridor toward them. They're out of focus, and it's like I was like, why? And the angle of the shot of Will Smith from that earlier scene, I had always taken it to be Gene Hackman's perspective because he's kind of standing where he would be if he was putting the keycard in. So it does work if you're not paying attention, And I've seen this movie probably like 10 times and I never noticed it before. But I don't know why. Like, did they in the editing room where they were like, we don't like this transition straight into the hotel room. We kind of would like a shot outside, but we don't want to get Will Smith and Gene Hackman back. It's weird, but it's very strange. I've never really seen anything like that before. Because it seems like technically it's a massive continuity error, that those other characters are in that scene technically. But okay, out of 10.
Well, I feel like this is going to come as a surprise, given now how critical I seem to have been of the film, but it is a 7.
Okay, it's a 9 for me.
Is it a 9 for you? Okay, so I did expect it going into it that it was going to affirm itself or reaffirm itself as an 8 after many years of having not watched it. But it's a 7. It's not a 9, it's a 7.
Okay, all right. Okay, that's it for part 2 of our Tony Scott trilogy. We're going to take a break from Tony Scott on our next episode because it's Halloween, and we're going to do a Halloween special. And then we're going to come back and finish the remainder of Tony Scott's filmography on part 3, 2 episodes from now. Please follow us on Twitter at _Journeymen, and you can subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, SoundCloud, or YouTube. My name is Bobby Lowe, and I've been here with
Bobby, Michael Pattison.
Thanks, and we'll talk to you on our Halloween episode.
Thank you.